You're going to really enjoy this next panel. We've got 3 experts up here that are going to talk about the state and legislative issues that are on all of our minds. Our first panelist is Chip Faulkner. He's the Associate Director of Citizens for Limited Taxation. Chip taught high school for 6 years in New York City and junior high for 3 years on Long Island. He became CLT Associate Director in 1980. He has testified at the State House before a joint taxation committee and other legislative committees periodically throughout the years. He's coordinated several petition drives for CLT, including Proposition 2.5 in 1979 and the surtax repeal in 1985. In 1985, Massachusetts' record number of certified signatures were collected for the tax issue. 136,153. He serves as host and organizer for the Friday Morning Group, a meeting of conservatives that's held monthly. It's been going on for over 10 years and averages about 50 members per meeting. Next, we have Frank Conte, who's the Director of Communications and Information Systems at the Beacon Hill Institute at Suffolk University. Frank holds a Master's of Science in Public Affairs from the University of Massachusetts, Boston. As Director of Communications, Mr. Conte is responsible for all aspects of media relations and the Institute's presence on the web and social media. He is also Project Manager for BHI's development officials and policymakers. He's Project Manager of BHI's renowned State Competitiveness Index, which since 2001 has been used by economic development projects for the Institute he also manages. He also manages BHI's internship program. Mr. Conte has worked at the Institute since 1996. He's also editor and publisher of eastboston.com, a neighborhood website established in 1995, and a former journalist and columnist. Next, we have State Representative Ryan Fattman. State Representative Fatman was elected to the 18th Worcester District in 2010 after defeating a 4-term incumbent Democrat. Down by 32 points 6 months out from the election, Ryan knocked on over 7,000 doors, swinging the polls 38 points in his direction and winning all 5 towns in his district. He's the youngest member of the House Republican Caucus at 27 years old. Ryan has fought for increased accountability in state government. He helped push a law restricting EBT benefits being used for lottery tickets, tobacco, and alcohol purchases. He fought for the implementation of secure communities in Massachusetts and has worked toward eliminating political perks like per diems for legislators. He was educated at Suffolk University as an undergraduate student, Tufts University as a graduate student, and was selected as a Harvard Kennedy School Rappaport Public Policy Fellow in 2008. Most importantly, he is engaged to marry his high school sweetheart, Stephanie Katsias, next May. We're going to start off the panel with Chip Faulkner. He is going to talk about his experience with the process of getting an initiative on the ballot.
Thanks for having me here this morning. I usually would wear a shirt and tie, but I thought for this crowd I would wear a golf shirt that was given to me when I gave a speech on Flag Day by Tea Party up there, and it basically shows a picture of Paul Revere on a galloping horse, and the logo says, "The voters are coming, the voters are coming." So I thought that would be, and please, they'll be coming this November. I joined CLT in 1979 and was immediately thrown into a ballot question campaign for Prop 2.5. I had been teaching in New York City, Long Island for 9 years, and we actually drove a taxi cab for about 10 months in New York City, which kind of prepared me for the battle on Prop 2.5 in Massachusetts. although not as dangerous. To get on the ballot, of course, all you have to do is go out and collect 3% of the total number of signatures cast for governor in the previous election. So if you had 2 million total votes cast for the governor, for Democrat, Republican, Libertarians, take 3% of that, which would be roughly 60,000, and that's what you have to get. Then you have a roughly 9-week period to get the signatures, and then it's on the ballot the following year. And there's more to it than that, but that's the simple part of it. Some states give you a lot more time to collect signatures, but to me, 9 weeks is fine, and the total you need is about right. But with 2.5, it was basically Barbara Anderson and myself, against the world on Prop 2.5, because if you saw the list of organizations, and they formed a group, the Committee to Oppose Prop 2.5, there were a list of about 80 groups, and if you read them all, you'd say they've included just about everybody in the state in opposition. But fortunately, the taxpayers who are sick and tired of property taxes being too high were with us. And we got a lot of media. Now, I'm talking in 1980, that's 32 years ago. You had a lot more print media. You had a state house that was packed with 25 reporters from various, maybe not 20 reporters anyway, from the Ledger, from the Globe, from the Herald, from the Lowell Sun, from the Lawrence Eagle Tribune, from the New Bedford Standard Times. Now you've got almost very few reporters in there in terms of print reporters. But in those days, they were all over the place, and we had to know how to respond to them. So Barbara and I sat down with our board of directors and a few of our people that were out giving speeches, and we came out with some basic guidelines to dealing with the media. And the one thing you do, and by the way, we printed up she printed up her thoughts in this green sheet, so I've got plenty here, so I'll leave them outside after the meeting in case you want to pick it up and read it. It's a reiteration of a lot of the stuff I'll say in the next few minutes. But one thing you do is you respond immediately. If the reporters call you on your cell phone, on regular phone, or whatever, or email nowadays email, you respond immediately. Because a lot of these reporters are on deadline. And if they call you at 2, you don't wait and call them the next morning, if the deadline is 6 o'clock that night. And you treat all reporters alike. You don't have any favorites. Sometimes you have a tendency, well, if it's a hometown reporter and he comes in and they know him, maybe I should give him the real story, and because the Globe doesn't like us or something like that. You cannot do that. You've got to treat them all alike. And that way you don't make any enemies, you might not make a lot of friends, but you won't alienate anyone in the press. And whatever you do, don't give scoops to people. Because if you give a scoop and that appears, all the other papers might be upset about that. And they don't like it, they might not call you as much. However, if someone does do a scoop on you, and let's say something's wrong with it, or they call you to comment, sure, call them back and comment all you want on it, if they've already done the work. Another thing you want to do is just always tell the truth. Don't try to, and I've seen this in some organizations, reporter will call and they'll try to finesse them or spin them. I mean, just tell what you want to do in terms of Prop 2.5. And we had a few basic things we wanted to do in terms of Prop 2.5, and that we kept repeating that throughout the campaign. News releases. We keep them very short. People don't have a lot of time to read, whether it's in an email or a print mail, whatever you want. Make it short and make sure you look it over for typos. Right after 2.5 passed in 1980, for the next 2 or 3 years, the legislature passed all sorts of bills to try to change 2.5. And what we did was we made sure that we got memos up to the legislature, and every time any bill came up, we testified against it, and we say 2.5. And just be aware of typos. I have to tell you this, whenever I think of typos, Don Fetter used to write a column for the Boston Herald. He wrote hundreds of columns. And one time he wrote a column in which he was talking about pornography. And he meant to say, people are tired of seeing other people exposing their genitals. Well, he accidentally said exposing their Gentiles. He says, I got more calls on that than the hundreds of columns I've written over the years. People calling me about that typo. It also have a consistent message, which I think I've already repeated. And our mantra through the whole campaign was that property taxes are too high and Proposition 2.5 will limit them. And we just kept repeating that. And we didn't try to get defensive, because if you buy into the liberals, and the liberals will always come back with, well, you know, this is going to happen and that's going to happen and the state's going to slide into the sea. If you start explaining that, why that will not happen, you're wasting your time because you're buying into their field. What you do is you just come back and repeat what's true. And what we knew when true in 1980 was property taxes were the second highest in the country. The only state we could prove higher was the state of Alaska. And I think New Jersey was a close second. But, and we knew they were too high. And, you know, our opposition would say stuff like, well, we've got a bill that will limit taxes. And we did some research and found out that since the Depression, there have been 136 bills to limit or cut property taxes, and not one of them had ever got to as much as a roll call vote in the state legislature. So people hearing that said, well, this is the only game in town. So we've got to, you know, vote for Prop 2.5. And plus, sometimes you get opposition that their own worst enemy. I one time was in a debate where one of my opponents said, you know, if Prop 2.5 passes, babies are going to burn in buildings because there'll be no firemen to rescue them. I mean, that was the type of rhetoric you were getting then. And I had one time, I ended a speech by saying that how can politicians always promise you a rose garden, but all we get is the fertilizer? Well, my opponent got up and he pointed at me and he said, well, I'm glad you said that, Mr. Faulkner, because all we've heard is fertilizer from you for the last hour. And the crowd got really mad and they stood up and started shouting at the guy. And the moderator had to calm the crowd down and say, well, let the man make his closing statement, which by that time was worthless. You know, maybe I've got maybe close to my time. I'll maybe end with a Prop 2.5 story you might like. Barbara Anderson, of course, led the charge on Prop 2.5, and this story was actually told by Jerry Cohen. Jerry Cohen used to be the Democratic state representative from Andover, and he was chairman of the Taxation Committee in the legislature. Well, he said during the fall of 1980, he says, I got invited to be in a debate. He said, well, there's some woman named Barbara Anderson leading some group called Citizens for Limited Taxation. So he says, 3 or 4 nights I studied all the stats on local aid, on the state budget, on why 2.5 would be a disaster, and you know, I just had it all lined up. So I go to the forum and I give the opening statement, and I'm going through all my stuff for 20 minutes, and then I end my little spiel, and the crowd gives me, you know, a little applause, kind of tepid, but applause. And he says, and then Barbara Anderson gets up to the mic and she goes, well, I'm just a housewife here, and I don't know much about these stats, but I know one thing. Property taxes are too damn high. And the crowd went nuts. I'm yelling, stomping the chairs, and Cohen said, why did I even do this study? Why bother? So that's about my spiel. I've got a few other things, but they're all contained in the screen sheet. Leave you one last thought, and we proved it with Prop 2.5. And this is from the late Howard Jarvis. Death and taxes are inevitable, but being taxed to death is not. Thank you.
Thank you, Chip. We're going to get through the panel and then, you know, allow for questions. I really like Barbara Anderson's advice about not being hostile to the media. As Tea Party members, those of you out there, we have to use every opportunity we can to get our message out there. We can't afford to alienate any group of people. So if you get back to them, as Chip said, in a timely manner with a consistent message, they will keep calling you. even if they don't agree with your policies. So that's very good advice to keep in mind. Next, Frank Conte is going to talk about dealing with the media and how to get them on board with these policies and initiatives that we want to move forward.
Thank you, Christine. It's nice to see a lot of new faces and familiar ones, and it's a very nice trip to come out here to Worcester, part of the state that's beautiful and that we totally ignore in Boston because, well, we're academics and we're in an ivory tower. But actually, the Beacon Hill Institute's not like that at all. It's a pretty down-to-earth organization, and we have a very good relationship with elected officials of both parties, if you can believe it. And we have a fairly decent relationship with the media because we occupy a space that was allowed to us in the vacuum of liberal Massachusetts, that we're non-liberal. I guess we're conservative libertarian, and we actually engage with professors in the economics department who actually voted for Obama. But we actually deal in the facts, and we deal in economics, and we let the story unfold itself. And I'm glad to be here because I didn't bring a PowerPoint or anything like that. I just like to rattle off a lot of resources that I think you as citizen journalists could benefit from in my presentation here this afternoon. The Beacon Hill Institute was established around 1991 by the late Ray Shamey, a former senatorial candidate and industrialist, and a professor of chairman of economics department in Suffolk, David Turk. And it was formed because there was a great need for serious tax policy analysis. As Chip inferred in his presentation, there was a need to put together some statistics that say once and for all taxes do matter and that they tend to destroy jobs and they're not productive for economic growth. On the other hand, I in the uncomfortable position being a moderate libertarian conservative of defending Massachusetts, because Massachusetts is a very wealthy state and it has done well in my measure of competitiveness. For the majority of the 10 years that I've engaged in this measurement with the creator, Dr. Jonathan Houghton, a professor of economics at Suffolk. And it's tough to go out there believing one thing, that taxes are bad, and then looking around saying that, over the long term, that's a key term here, the long term Massachusetts does quite well. And why is that? Well, I happen to believe that some things happened in the 90s and in the 80s, and part of that was a Proposition 2.5 story, and part of that was a resistance to taxes, even though we were sending people to Congress like Barney Frank and Senator Kennedy. That there was a groundswell of anti-tax sentiment that I think some elected officials finally got a hold of, and that the business community latched onto. So I think that the Beacon Hill Institute, which was, as Chip will probably recall, was instrumental in helping to provide the, quote, intellectual framework, I fear for using that term because of Professor Warren, for fighting the graduated income tax. And so there is some hope, there is a glimmer in the ivory tower at Suffolk University. We're one of several think tanks around the state that is not typically super liberal, and it always thinks that Keynesian economics is a solution to our current malaise, or that more spending in public infrastructure is going to lead us out of this shortfall. So I'm going to discuss a couple of issues that might be helpful to you as citizen journalists to look beyond the headline, and you could learn how to really get the gist of the story. Let me just raise a couple issues that the Beacon Hill Institute has worked on in the past. Let's talk about the minimum wage, police details, the revenue estimates that we've made in the past, project labor agreements, of which I'll explain in some detail, and the prevailing wage. And there'll be a couple other issues that I'll recall as I move along. But let's talk about the minimum wage. Any sound economist will tell you that minimum wages are bad, yet in Massachusetts, everyone, including former Governor Romney, supports raising the minimum wage. No better way exists to destroy opportunity than to create higher minimum wages. Look at the unemployment rate among black teenagers in Massachusetts. It's astronomical and it's immoral. But we continue to support higher minimum wage. It makes no sense. One of the groups that you ought to be familiar with is the Retailers Association in Massachusetts. They were out front on the minimum wage, and rightly so. But it wasn't simply the fact that they were against the minimum wage, it was the fact that they were able to find this factoid that I thought was that spoke volumes about Massachusetts, which is this. A minimum wage would destroy a small retailer because in Massachusetts, the strength of the labor unions is such that on Sunday, you would have to pay a higher minimum wage at double the rate. And if you go over the border in New Hampshire, a similar retailer wouldn't have to do that. So the fact that in Massachusetts it's not simply raise the minimum wage and more people will get, higher incomes or whatever fable they want to believe. It's the fact that you have to look beyond the headline and look how deleterious this would be to Massachusetts in terms of the Sunday work schedule. So that was one piece that I've always remembered about that debate. Now the other one is about police details. Believe it or not, the Beacon Hill Institute helped develop Patrick on this issue of police details. And we look beyond the simple, you're pro-police or anti-police, you're pro-crime, or all the other foolishness that came up in this issue. And I have to give some credit to the governor. He went out there. It didn't exactly come out the way we wanted to, because in the end, the police unions did win. You don't see many flaggers in Massachusetts, do you? But you have to ask yourself, how do 49 other states get by without a mandatory police detail on most construction sites? It's unbelievable. But apparently we believe in the Massachusetts miracle. My point here is that, again, you have to look beyond the headline. During the debate, which was very acrimonious and was very, very hurtful, and it kind of diminished my respect for police unions in this state because you were going after their bread and butter, their perk. They had one good point, and they said, well, the way the system is structured in Massachusetts is that you have a prevailing wage system. So if you have a prevailing wage for a flagger, that flagger is only going to be $2 to $3 cheaper than having a police officer there. And plus, with the police officer there, you'll be able to fight crime. Okay. All right. But the point that they made is that the prevailing wage is the problem in Massachusetts and how that prevailing wage is determined. And we've conducted in the past a body of work criticizing the prevailing wage in Massachusetts, which is one of the highest in the nation. And it's a problem because it's not reported by the Department of Labor correctly. In fact, it's reported by the Department of Labor as two different units in two different ways. And not to belabor the point, excuse the pun, but the fact that you have a prevailing wage is determined by the unions and union firms that have an interest in filing that paperwork. Whereas a non-union firm is probably so busy trying to make a living that they don't have the incentive to file that paperwork, and the prevailing wage is not the wage that really prevails in the market. So this kind of detail, this kind of minutiae is what I'm trying to bring out to you as citizen journalists, is what you have to look for. It's just beyond the headline, beyond the histrionics, behind the conservative liberal. You have to look at these economic facts that are immutable. I want to give, before I forget, I want to give a big shout out to the Franklin Center because I had the opportunity to work with the Wisconsin Reporter recently on Act 10, which was Governor Walker's proposed reform. And the Beacon Hill Institute, a couple of weeks before the vote, issued an extensive study of the economic impact of those reforms. And we found that it saved $1 billion and preserved public sector jobs. And it was great because I managed to work with the Wisconsin reporter, and I did, contrary to what Chip was talking, offer an exclusive. I'll get into that later, and I'd be willing to answer more questions on that technique because it is a double-edged sword. But I want to give a big shout out to the Wisconsin reporter and the Franklin Center. They do very good work, and it came down to a choice between giving an exclusive to them or the Wall Street Journal, and it worked out better for both the Institute and the issue itself. Let me move on to project labor agreements. Does anyone know what project labor agreements are in this room? Okay. Project labor agreements are essentially pro-union, anti-competitive measures used by state governments to limit competition in the bidding. The Beacon Hill Institute has shown over the years, time and time again, that project labor agreements on public construction cost the taxpayer between 12 and 18%. Most of our studies are focused on school construction, which is a pretty good proxy. But project labor agreements are just totally out of line. In fact, there was one here that was of a parking garage in Worcester, I believe, that was very contentious. And the current issue is, and let me try to provoke another laugh here. If you really want to boil down a project labor agreement, just open your mind up and say two words: big dig. The big dig was a union-only project labor agreement. While no studies have been done on how that of in itself created the cost to rise, you could bet that had something to do with it, okay? So project labor agreements has been at the center of BHI's work over the past couple of years. We've coordinated with the Associated Builders and Contractors in Massachusetts and nationally. So I don't want to carry on too long because I think I could catch up with a lot of this in the Q&A session. Let me just bring what I call a victory to your attention. Recently in New Hampshire, if you could believe this, the Obama administration tried to slap a project labor agreement in Manchester on a Job Corps training center. Now bear in mind that New Hampshire, unlike Massachusetts, has a very small union workforce. But again, looking beyond the headline, looking beyond the histrionics of the debate, and looking at how the policy is so tortured and so distortionary, the fact that came out is that since there were so few union members in New Hampshire, that non-union workers, construction workers, the majority of them, would not be able to participate in that job. Most of those jobs, union jobs, would come from Massachusetts. And it's just absurd. And I think what happened recently is that for whatever reason, it being an election year, I think the Department of Labor, thinking New Hampshire might be a crucial state or whatever, some political consideration, they withdrew their designation of this job center in Manchester as a project labor agreement. And that was a big victory. And that was made possible by an affidavit that was filed by BHI's Executive Director, David Turk, a few weeks ago. So they withdrew the project labor agreement. Now it's supposedly open to open bid competition. So I'll touch up on another thing so that I don't monopolize time. But I think that's what you need to look at, is look beyond the headline, look at these little policy variances that soon become the story unto themselves, okay? The minimum wage, the Sunday hiring, the police details, the prevailing wage, and, the project labor agreements. Unions are big on saying, oh, we hire local workers. Oh, no, that's not the case in Manchester. So I'll be happy to answer any questions later.
Okay. Thank you, Frank. Frank, could you give us Beacon Hill Institute's website so we can join?
It's fairly easy, www.beaconhill.org.
Wow. I highly recommend that you join that website. They have been a tremendous resource to the Tea Party and will definitely help you out with policy information that you might need. No, we're going to talk about a lot of different issues today, and if you're like me, you get easily overwhelmed and trying to find something particular to focus on. If I might make a suggestion that maybe you pick a couple pet issues, that are important to you. Joyce, where's Joyce? Joyce is our resident HUD expert. All things HUD, she's all over that. And sometimes it's nice to focus on certain things and sort of become an expert on those things. So that's something that I might suggest. Speaking of taxes, I just learned this recently, and maybe I'm the only one in this room that didn't know. I doubt it, though. It was at the Merrimack Valley Tea Party meeting. Ted, who talked to us about the cell phone tax? Was that Jim Lyons, Representative Jim Lyons, who we're very lucky to have in the Merrimack Valley, was the only one to vote against the state budget, right? I believe. He informed us that if you buy a cell phone in Massachusetts, say the cell phone's worth $800, you may spend $200 on that phone, but you're going to pay the sales tax on the $800. I had no idea. I live on the New Hampshire border. People aren't stupid. They're going to drive over the border and buy their cell phones there. I don't know, you're not as lucky down here to be able to do that. But these are things that, I'm surprised by this, and I consider myself pretty plugged in. I bet there's a lot of people that aren't aware of that. And these are just kinds of things that we could, get out to the general public and make them aware of.
Actually, Christine,
Yes.
He was the only one last year that were actually for that voted against the state budget this year, so Jim was not the only one.
Do you know who the four were?
It was Levy, Adams, Lombardo, and Lyon, so 4 Merrimack Valley.
Okay.
In 4 Adams Valley.
Thank you for clearing that up. Next, we have Representative Ryan Fattman, who is fresh off the door-knocking trail today. He's going to talk about how all of this ties into the legislative process.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you to begin. It's great to see a lot of friendly faces, as Frank was saying, and also a lot of new ones. And I want to thank you because you guys are our troops out there spreading the word as we work hard in the legislature, as well as helping us get elected. So thank you very much for being here today and your commitment to the cause. I'm going to talk a little bit about how to bring all these things together, but mostly using the media to help you win. And win can be defined as, very different. It can be winning on a local issue, winning an election, basically getting the best quote into a story. We've had a lot of recent controversy about our lieutenant governor in Worcester County, and the TNG has talked a lot about it. And there's been some quotes from local Republicans in there, and they've had some wins with some of the little digs that they've been able to get in. I want to talk a little bit about the lessons that I've learned in the legislature, what I'm hearing on the ground, and also give you some media advice. But first, I think it's important I start with a lesson in life that I've learned. I've been dating the same girl for 9 years, 10 coming up in October, and planning a wedding with her now has taught me more about politics and using the media than anything else in my life. In fact, when I first decided I was going to run for state representative, I had been dating Stephanie for 7 years. And I called her up. She was actually a student at BU. She was going into her senior year, and she was required to do an internship. So she was out in New York City working for Time Warner. And I thought it was a good idea, contemplating running for state representative, to call her up and say, Stephanie, I have a very important question I want to ask you about. I'd like to take you out to a nice dinner and see what you have to say. And of course, the poor girl thought I was going to ask her to marry me. And I was thinking about running for state rep, and that's what I asked her about. So she wanted to kill me. But it taught me a good lesson, and that was that when you're dealing with the media or you're dealing with voters, that you must look through the eyes of other people. That what you necessarily care about is not what they necessarily care about. And if you don't find a way to harness that, put the wind in your sails and run with that, blow with that, it's a very, very important concept. Everybody looks through the world in their own kitchen window. They're looking out there, and that's what they care about. And finding ways to be relatable and using the media to help you relate to them is very, very important. I'm going to break it to you very, very easy. You guys are not normal. Being here today is exceptional. It's not the rule. There's a lot of people out there who just don't care. They don't know who their selectmen are. They don't know who their state reps are. They don't know their state senators, their congressmen. Some are lucky to name the president and the vice president of the United States. You must understand that in order to deal with the media, in order to deal with voters. Because complex issues are tough to deal with, and trying to explain them in easy ways is very difficult. I've been on the ground. In fact, today I was out door knocking. And started at 10:30, got done around 12:45 to get over here. And I can tell you, people want to talk about certain things. The economy, of course, is one of them. But if you can harness something that's relatable, for example, the EBT scandal, with purchasing cruises, on the EBT card and makeup and, alcohol, tobacco products. One of the things I've been saying as I go door to door is the media has put a lot of attention on this, so people are aware about it. So what I say is, if you go into a CVS in the next few days, look at what it says on the checkout register. It says, effective immediately, EBT cards may no longer be used for tobacco products, alcohol products, or lottery tickets. And what I'll say to them is, that's something that I helped push through the legislature. Instantly, they understand that. And because they understand that, they look at me in a favorable light. When it comes to the media, the media wants to talk about things that the everyday person is going to read about. The Boston Herald is exceptional at doing this. They want to take sensational items and they want to make them even more sensational. One of those sensational items that I would put out there was Governor Deval Patrick. The governor was being criticized for leaving the state, and we've had some governors in the past who have done that in Massachusetts, and Governor Patrick had said he would be different. The media was all over this, and a lot of times in selling a message, it's about trying to think of a way to deliver it a little differently, to get people's attention. And so I came up with a little quote that, made a little bit of attention because people didn't necessarily think of it this way. The question was asked to me, what do you think about the governor leaving? I said, well, the problem is not when Governor Patrick is gone, it's when he's here, and when he's raising taxes. And that little anecdote explains what you have to do in order to capture the media's attention. And when you do that, they will continue to call you back because they like to be able to quote people who are quotable. When you have a good issue and you can put a spin on it that makes people pay even more attention or makes them laugh a little bit, they really appreciate it, their readers really appreciate it, and it's something that you can try to utilize and build upon every single time. The other thing I would say is, when I'm out there door knocking and going around, I'll never forget this experience. I was outside of the campaign trail. I give myself some free time every once in a while. Usually it's either spend time with my fiance or on Wednesday nights I play basketball. And one Wednesday night I went into the gym and no one talks about politics. I try to actually hide that I'm a state rep there so people don't know. I just like to play basketball. And I had a guy come up to me who's a teacher in Sutton, and he said, Ryan, I never talk about politics, and I know you're involved in it, but I got to tell you something. You guys are trying to ban bake sales in schools? What the hell is wrong with you? And once again, it was a very relatable topic that was easily understood. And what he didn't know was that this issue was actually voted upon in 2010, that I had nothing to do with it, but because people take things in sound bites and snippets, they automatically make assumptions. So what I had to do was say, wait a minute, that wasn't me. That was 2010, and actually right now we're trying to overturn that. But it shows you where people are at. A guy who had nothing to do with politics, doesn't care, but then he found something that just really sounds ridiculous. It makes no sense to him whatsoever. He captured that in his mind, and he ran with it, and he decided to bring it up to me. That's where the average person is. They really don't care. So when you show up on their door or you reach out to them, they really are kind of surprised. If you're ever going to be involved in politics, just out of curiosity, how many people are from the Worcester County area in general? Most people. And how many people are either involved in a campaign or a local Tea Party, Republican Town Committee, something to that extent? How many people have been involved where they've had to directly talk to the media? I know Ken definitely has. I see you in the paper all the time, and it's a good thing. So one of the things that Chip had talked about was when the media calls you, to call them back. And I agree with that 99% of the time. There is a 1% of the time where I will call them back if they want to talk about something, but they don't tell me what they want to talk about. Because I believe in always being prepared. I have a good lesson in that, and I had a good lesson in that. And basically, the media, especially as Republicans, as Tea Party activists, as conservatives, whatever, they may try to skew what you say. I've had that done to me multiple times, and sometimes it's been okay. It's the gist of what I was saying, and sometimes it wasn't what I was saying at all. My advice on the media and dealing with the media was always know what they want to talk about before you engage in the conversation. If they call you, perhaps, and they don't say what they want to talk about, perhaps have someone else call them for you and say, this is Jane Doe, I'm calling for Karen Potter. I know you had called her about this particular issue, wanting to quote. We're just wondering what exactly you wanted to talk about. Because what can happen is they can completely spin what you say. They can catch you off guard for something that you're not aware of. And if they do catch you off guard, they may try to make you look bad. You don't want to find yourself in that situation. One of the things that I try to do every morning that I wake up, being a little bit more involved because this is my job, is I roll out of bed and I go right to actually my iPad or my computer and I look at what's happening in Massachusetts. What has happened overnight, what's happened over the last 24 hours, and is there anything significant that's going on? And if, say, for example, the unemployment numbers come out and Massachusetts just had its unemployment rate go up, I make sure that I come up with some sort of witty thing to say if a reporter were ever to reach out to me and talk about what's going on with the economy. For example, one time I got a call from the media saying, Massachusetts said that they were leading the nation in job creation, and we found out that the numbers are being fixed. I pointed out that if you look at Massachusetts macroeconomics in the last 10 years, Massachusetts really hasn't added any jobs to its economy. But more importantly, we've had more speakers of the House indicted than jobs created in a decade. That's not a state heading in the right direction. So immediately, it's quotable. You get people's attention. The reader looks at it and kind of gives a little bit of a laugh. And the media is coming back to you now because they want to talk about it. Not only that, but it simplifies the issue where the average voter can't name the 3 speakers who were indicted, can't name Diane Wilkerson, who was stuffing her bra with cash, can't name James Marzilli, the state senator who was out there grabbing women. They don't really pay attention to those specific details, but they do know that we've had some ethical issues. You can say, in Massachusetts, bribes, you can make it out to the politician. They take it in check, not cash. And, people will get that. You're just poking fun at a particular issue that is well known about and that people do care about. So those are sort of my 3 snippets of the anecdotals, what I'm hearing from the ground, and some media advice, and happy to take any questions.
Okay.
Quick thing. Frank mentioned the big dig. It was George Kavarian, the former House Speaker, who said Dukakis was responsible for the big dig. And someone asked him why. He said because when you heard Dukakis speak, you realized he could depress the central artery and bore the third Harvard tunnel.
That's awesome. Ryan, thank you. I like your idea of using humor with the media. That's a great idea. My predecessor, Kristen Varley, who was fabulous, was known as the bomb dropper. I'm not suggesting that you necessarily do that. She was very, very good at it, but she would just, drop these bombs and just wait for the fallout. But I'm not quite that good. Now we're going to open it up to question and answers. Yes, sir.
Sorry, I was speechless for a second. Representative. So since we're going to be acting in the opposite role, what is the best way for us to phrase that message that we leave on a politician's voicemail that will call us back and will be sort of vulnerable to the fact that we're going to hit him with a 2x4 when he calls us? You know, obviously, we can't say, can you respond to the fact that you're accused of taking bribes? Can we, you know, how do we language that? Because of course they want to get out of this. Yeah.
I think I'm very particular about it myself because I want to protect myself, but most people aren't. A lot of times people are caught off guard. And I'll tell you, the reason why I learned this lesson is the day that I got inaugurated, there was a tribute to the 3 formerly indicted Speakers of the House. They talked about, for an hour, how smart these men were. It's kind of funny, if they were smart, they wouldn't have been caught, right? But, you know, and all this stuff. And I remember sitting there and being like, what world did I walk into? And so I left the House chamber and I bumped into this, you know, girl about my age, and she looked at me and she said, "You look upset about something." And I said, "I am." I said, "I can't believe what just happened in there." And I said, "It's really disappointing." And she put her hand out and she said, "My name's Hillary Chabot from the Boston Herald. That will be in the newspaper tomorrow." And it was. And I remember walking in the State House the next day and having like daggers coming out of the old eyes. But I think being vague, you know, in all seriousness, if you're looking to, in the role of a reporter, and you're calling and you want to get somebody on the record on something, you have to say, you know, about bribes, for example, if the specific accusation is someone's taking money, it would be, you want to talk about ethics reform, you know? It fits into the overall picture, right? So.
Thank you.
Yep.
John.
Another question for Ryan. First, I voted for you, and if anyone knows me voting for anybody, a Republican or a Democrat, it's a big feat, so congratulations on that.
Thanks for the vote.
The Worcester Tea Party has a group that is trying to do, like what Matt said, is in a lot of what we've seen today, ask poignant and relevant questions the media is not asking our representatives, and those looking for those leadership positions, catch them off guard, get them on film or get them on audio, and then.
Yeah, I think one of the best services in the state is State House News Service. I mean, State House News Service covers the State House and what happens there. And I believe, you know, it's like $150 a year for a subscription, which is a little bit expensive maybe, but it's worth it. Because literally every...
It's per month, like $300 a month.
Is it that much?
I thought there was a free version of that too.
But you can get a free email summation a week, and they
Right.
don't charge you anything for that.
Just,
Yes.
Rob, you know, also
I
posts
have
his
it,
stories,
I do
yeah.
some stuff if you need anything, but the dirty little secret is, if you Google State House News Service and what you're looking for, the Boston Herald publishes just about every State House News Service. So do Metro West, but they've had to cut back because State House News has gotten upset. What you don't get is the summaries of what happened in the House and those sorts of things. But most of their articles are, I have a Google, set up a Google alert and just have State House News Service in quotes, and you'll get it as they have.
I think, one other thing that I was going to actually give Rob...
And I didn't say that.
Right. I was going to give Rob a shout out. I know we presented before. Red Mask Group usually has a lot of great articles on their website, and a lot of the things are public record. I made a huge deal out of per diems when I ran in 2010. You know, unemployment was unbelievably high in my district, so I was going and saying, you know, you can't even go to work, and yet my opponent's getting paid to drive to work. So it was relatable to people. Those are all public records. You know, the treasurer's office holds them. I would, if I were you guys, I'd pull them up and see who's taking what and what they're getting and how much. That's a great issue. No one ever talks about it. Maybe once a year there's a news story about it, but no one ever really pushes that issue. I think it's a good one. And then the other thing is legislative process is a story, and I don't know how to make it simple to make people care about it. I've been debating this for a long time, but it's incredibly important. What I mean by that is Republicans, you know, we're in the minority, obviously. We've put forward a lot of good ideas. We've tried to, you know, have voter ID. We've tried to put ID so you get any public benefit. A lot of times what happens is procedurally, The Democrats will then, what they do, an inoculator is what they call it, and they vote to study it. And a study is where things go to die. And that prevents them from having to take a tough vote. Finding out what studies are being done, and maybe Rob can post some of those on, he does a lot, but that's a great issue to look at, because it's political courage.
And, you know, quite frankly, if they vote to send something to study, they voted against it.
Yeah.
Is the way that I look at it.
That's how we
And
cut
they'll say-
through
and
the
they'll say
rating.
that they don't, but you can say that they voted against it. Yeah, all the roll calls are, and I'll have that, if anybody emails me, I'll show you, I showed you earlier where to get the roll calls. Because all the study votes are roll calls.
On CLT's rating, if you vote to send it to a study, we counted it as a vote against the taxpayers.
Right.
Well, I mean, after all, what the hell are you studying? It is what it is, vote up or down.
Right.
And if I may, if anybody wants to join that team, email me. It's John at Worcester Tea Party, JOHN.
Frank, you looked like you wanted to say something.
I just wanted to point out a resource that, how do you know what's going on? Not necessarily messages, but there's a great group of which BHI is an associate member. It's a national group. It's a state policy network. And it's a network of think tanks from all across the country, and they're pro-market, conservative, libertarian, small government groups, and they often work on a lot of local issues. And you might be able to pull from their research agenda some ideas on what to write about here in Massachusetts. So I think it's spn.org. But State Policy Network is an excellent group. Another group that's worth checking out is the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. Like BHI, they are affiliated with in an academic setting, and they do a lot of very interesting things on pensions and so on and so forth.
Can you spell that?
Mercatus, Mercatus, I believe. Just Google George Mason University.
Bonnie?
I wondered if you would call.
Which one we were fighting.
Oh.
It's okay.
Whoever's got the most interesting.
I'm just going to stand up. It is getting hard to hear for those of us sitting back here, so anyone who asks a question, if you stand up, it would be a lot easier. A comment, Ryan, on what you made, we had done a training a long time ago that the best piece of advice Donna and I took out of it was when we're getting calls by a reporter, we email them and ask them what the question is. And then we get responses pretty darn quickly. And then we try to get right back to them, and that has really helped us not get caught off guard. But I had a question about the Prop 2.5. If you could give us a one line about what you think Prop 2.5 did for our state, and how any sort of our verbiage today could relate people, especially that would have voted in the 80s, that, you know, as we talk about bigger, you know, more taxes, more government, is there anything relevant to what you did then that, you know, we could bring into a discussion today?
Well, I could cite two things. We actually did some research and tracked the property tax increases from 1970 to 1980. And if 2.5 were not in effect, your property tax bills today would be minimum, going on the rates the previous decade, at least double to sometimes triple what they are now. And the other one is far easier to track, and that is the auto excise, which used to be $66 per thousand. Because of Prop 2.5, it is now $25. So whatever your auto excise bill is, $150, $200, cut it by 2/3. You're paying about a third. So if it's $150, you'd be paying about $400, $450. If it weren't for CLT, which allows me to, by the way, say, if you want to become a member of the organization that saved you all this money, you can go to our website, which is very simple, cltg.org. Again, www.cltg.org. Basic membership is only $30. We'd love to have you join.
Let me add something about Proposition 2.5 from what I've gleaned from the literature over the years, is that I think Proposition 2.5 is far better than Proposition 13. Proposition 13 had high signal value of an anti-tax movement, and it wasn't, today it has a lot of problems, I think, but Proposition 2.5 is worded correctly, is a good curb on the appetites of local government, and let's not forget, local government has a big appetite, okay? And then, as Chip will tell you, Governor Christie and his people have been calling around Massachusetts to learn about how Proposition 2.5 works, excuse me, because they would like to put something in place in New Jersey which suffers from really high property tax. The other thing is, even though we have Proposition 2.5 and everybody bemoans the fact that property taxes are so high in New Hampshire, I think that still property taxes compared to New Hampshire are pretty high. New Hampshire's higher, but we're still high. We're not a low property tax state by any measure.
The novelist Michael Eisenberg, I don't mean to embarrass you, Michael, but Michael Eisenberg just wrote a wonderful novel called Full Asylum, and he's generously donated one that we'll be giving away as a door prize. Yes?
So, thank you. My question, Ryan talked about how the media try and twist your words. And we had a good example of that in the last election when Christine O'Donnell asked rhetorically, where does the Constitution say separation of church and state? We all know what that means, but her opponent twisted it to mean she didn't know about the First Amendment. So my question for all the panelists is, what advice can you give us when talking to the media to kind of word our statements to make them twist-proof?
Wow. You go first.
Bonnie Johnson mentioned that she asked via email for questions. I actually don't respond to reporters anymore unless it's by email. Because I had my words twisted once pretty badly, and it caused quite a controversy. And so I will respond only via email. I'll be happy to get the question over the phone, but I tell them I will be responding in email, and I'd appreciate it if you use that as the quote. And a lot of times there's no problem with that. By the way, you wrote a book, Full Asylum. Was that about Beacon Hill, or?
Going off of what we talked about earlier with the left and their tactics and the blueprint and all of that stuff, Ryan, Mark Lombardo, and Paul Adams have disproportionately been, not the victims, but the target of attacks from the left because they're all under 30. They're going, and that's why you've got to protect guys like Ryan and Paul and Mark, because what they're doing is they're trying to stop, by twisting words and making things, our younger people. Ryan may be the future governor someday, or the lieutenant governor, or the, whatever he rises up to be, but they're trying to stop our young representatives at a young level. So just make sure that you have their back when they do stuff like that. And those are the tactics of the left that we don't do. And you brought up that thing, so I just wanted to.
To answer your question, if they twisted our words, and your definition of twist, it could be a tweak, but I know what Barbara Anderson and I would do. If they ever really distorted it, the first thing we do is call them and ask for a correction. And if you didn't get a correction, that's the last time they use CLT as a source. And these reporters want to keep their sources open. So it's self-defeating for them to antagonize a source because they might win a temporary victory, but in the long run it hurts their credibility and their lifelines to people.
I just want to add that you have to be a little empathetic to people in the media, and since you are going to become citizen journalists, you're going to have to relate to the huge changes going on in the media. There are fewer reporters, there are fewer people covering meetings that are of secondary and tertiary importance because the newspapers have cut their staff. And then you have this cyclone called the 24-hour news cycle, which no one seems to understand, and not even the major media can deal with. Before, you had a cycle that was like a work day. Now it's 24 hours, and then you could put something out there, and then that increases, from my experience, and I want to touch upon this, is the need for exclusives. Every reporter feels like that they add value when they have procured an exclusive from a source. And while that may not be as important to citizen journalists who operate on, in the realm of philosophy and promoting ideas, it matters much to people who are professional reporters. And they try over and over again to get an exclusive out of you, and it's very difficult to say no, and it's very, very dangerous. And I can say, you can alienate a lot of people, a lot of their competitors, by giving them an exclusive. On the other hand, when you feel as a promoter, as a public relations professional, shut out, you turn to that exclusive because you can turn to your funders, your donors, your supervisors, your bosses, and say, look, I got an exclusive, they published it. Whereas I had a good study on something like, the Massachusetts tax cap, okay? And it was well done and well researched, we spent a lot of time, and I put it out there and not one paper covered it. So public relations people are in a difficult position with regard to this exclusive business.
I think we may have time for one more question before we get the hook. Yes?
Can you speak about Massachusetts pension liability, how it compares with other states, the level of funding, and the other piece of information, I don't even know if it's available, is what type of fees do we pay for financial services company to manage pension funds? Do you have any good information about where Massachusetts compares with other states? The last factoid that I remember reading about was that our pension liability is the highest per capita in the United States, even though the actual amount is...
The Beacon Hill Institute will be releasing a study on pensions in the coming months. With regard to the financial fees, I'm not really privy or expert on the relationship between the Treasurer's office and how competitive that business is. But it's a big issue across the country. Massachusetts seems to be kind of in the middle. I will tell you this, that the expectations of the returns are overly optimistic in Massachusetts, as they are elsewhere. And I think Massachusetts, the Prim Board looks at a rate of 8% from the market, and God help us, no one has seen 8% returns in the market. And it's very tricky if you're predicating, a public pension system on those kind of returns when state governments face shortfalls as they did at post-recession.
Hey, unfortunately, I think we're out of time. I know you still had some questions, but I want to thank the panel. You've been very informative. Thank you very much.